Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Google Hangouts with Ava Schausberger. Now, Ava was one of the authors of the selection toolkit for employers that we produced through the Impact Project. Welcome today, Ava.
Thanks for having me.
So I've invited you into the Hangout to talk about some of the tools and how employers are going to use them. But before we do all of that, let's talk a little bit about alternative careers. So first of all, what is an alternative career? Can you define it so that we start off on a really clear footing?
Right. So alternative career, you can actually look at it from two sides, from the candidate side and from the employer side. It's a term that's mostly come from the candidate side, and for employers it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So let's start with the candidate. For the candidate, the way we have defined it for the project, we mean employment that uses a lot of the skills that the candidate already has. So even though it's maybe in another industry or in a different position, but it uses a large number of skills and knowledge that the candidate already has. So that's one very important criterion for a good alternative career. Another one is that there is opportunity for advancement. Now, we're not saying somebody has to be promoted within 3 months, but there should be some kind of a path that the person can work towards. So essentially, it shouldn't be a dead-end job at a minimum wage. That is not an alternative career as we see it for the purposes of this project.
I kind of remember, too, you using a really interesting explanation for alternative careers. And what you said at that time was that it's an unorthodox use of skills. Can you talk more about that?
So that's the employer perspective. For employers, it would mean hiring someone with an unorthodox background, or perhaps you could also say someone whose fit for the position is less than obvious. To use another example, when you hire a grad from the local college or university, or headhunt someone from your local competitor, then an interview with some key technical questions is probably going to be enough to fill a position. But once you deal with unfamiliar education institutions and workplaces in other countries, then additional tools can help an employer to ensure that they're still recruiting in a fair way and that they get the info they need without taking a lot of time. So tool number one is a self-assessment for the candidate. It deals with tricky behavioral issues like managing time, professionalism, or lifelong learning, all things that are very important in Canada. These can be tricky across cultures. The self-assessment does not only provide you with information, but it also raises the candidate's awareness of what's important, and it gets them thinking in the right direction.
We're going to group some tools together, right? So the next group after tool 1 is tool number 2, number 6, and number 9. Okay, tell us about those tools.
Tool number 2 gives a series of suggestions on how to best screen a candidate for sector knowledge. So what do they really need to know? This can be done during the interview, but it might just be better to do it up front. So one example that we give is that an employer should not spend time screening a candidate for knowledge that they can easily learn within the first few months on the job. What is considered sector knowledge? There would be, for example, basic engineering principles, or computer programming, or basics of molecular and cellular biology. So those kinds of things we would suggest to be included in such a sector knowledge assessment. And the tool gives guidelines on how to screen for it and how to develop it easily.
Okay, sounds great.
Now, tool 6 deals with the practical performance. For most jobs, there are practical tasks that are typical. You can really learn a lot about a person when you observe them do something. Now, the tricky part is to identify what is key. What are the appropriate tasks that really represent a position? So an obvious one, for example, a laboratory worker might be asked to perform a standard test on a sample. And the tool gives you tips on how to select the key tasks and how to make the most of them during an observation period. So that's tool 6. And then tool 9 deals with obtaining references for candidates. Now, once you deal with people who don't have any work experience in Canada, you're most often challenged by language differences, cultural differences, and simple time zone differences. This tool gives recommendations on how to go about getting references and what to be careful of. And it also encourages employers to look at different types of references. So for example, most newcomers have gone through some kind of language training or perhaps employment counseling. The employers should consider talking to one of those people about the soft skills of the candidate, because they would be more than able to talk about it. So tools 3 and 4 deal with English writing and essential skills. For tool number 3, it will definitely be necessary to have a clear and unambiguous way of writing. And that is something that employers can easily assess on their own by developing a simple writing test. Whether the person needs to communicate by email or write technical reports, the employer should focus on the writing that's important. And this tool gives suggestions on how to set up a simple test. Now, tool number 4 deals with essential skills. And in the case of the test that we're recommending, it's reading, numeracy, and document use. And those 3, among others, but those 3 are considered foundational skills. And what that means is that if those are not, a person doesn't have a high enough level of those, then they probably also can't perform higher level, more professional skills. So more and more employers are starting to look at essential skills. We suggest to use the available ITA Skills Passport that's available in BC. It provides profiles for a large number of technicians. So it's actually a position or job or type of work specific assessments that it gives. Tool number 5 is one of my personal favorites. It deals with personality and attitudes. This one explains on how to use psychometric tests. Those are the tests that have been prepared professionally. So it's something you would buy off the shelf. And those tests are proven to reliably predict job success. So we are encouraging employers to consider using them. There are very good tests out there. They're web-based, so they're easy to access, they're very affordable, and they're suitable for not only recruitment, but also development, for succession planning, for training assessment, a needs assessment. And what they do is they identify how a person communicates in the workplace, how they fit into a team, and they predict to some extent job success. So look for an explanation of the benefits of those tests and how to select the right one in tool number 5. So tool number 7 deals with the interview. Now, within the context of using the selection toolkit, the interview has now changed a little bit from a traditional interview. It still remains the key step in the process, but the interviewer now goes in armed with much more information about the candidate. And so the interview can now hone in on the critical areas where there is clarification needed, where there are some gaps or particular concerns. It also creates a the interview as a two-way dialogue, because the candidates can hear their results, how employers think they did. And if the employers engage in an interview as we describe it in Tool 7, then they can have a more meaningful and more transparent and human conversation, which is always good in times when every rejected job candidate becomes again an advocate or somebody who talks negatively about your company. Tool 10 is it can be a very brief conversation, doesn't have to take up a lot of time, but we're encouraging employers to take the interview a little bit further. So if they already know that they're not going to recommend this person, then we're suggesting that the employer take a few minutes and talk to the candidate about what they think where they would fit. So what are positions or jobs that maybe they're better suited for? The employer would say something like, so based on the assessments we've done with you, the conversation I've had with you, it seems to me that a really good fit for you would be job X or position Y. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any openings right now, but I would encourage you to maybe apply to some of those, that kind of thing. So there's two tools. The other one deals with how to communicate the actual rejection. And I know a lot of employers have very specific policies and they shy away from providing too much information. And of course, if somebody decides to use this tool, it has to fit within the policies and the guidelines on how rejection is done. But what we are suggesting is to revisit how rejections are communicated. Because if it's done constructively and thoughtfully, it can really be seen as very positive by the candidate. Tool number 11 is focused on what happens when somebody gets hired. Especially for alternative career candidates, learning plans are so important. That doesn't mean that you have to dedicate a full-time person in the company to teach them, but just to summarize and put it in writing what has come out of the interview, the hiring process, and where are some of the gaps, and where should the now new employee put their effort in the onboarding process. You might also be interested in the employer guides where we've described different sectors within the context of different countries, so that if you use those assessment tools and you have a candidate from a certain country, then you can get some more background on education and what type of institutions are in those countries. So I definitely encourage people to look at those too.
Thank you very much, Ava. Great to talk to you. And we're going to close the Hangout now. And if you have any questions, please post them in a comment and I'll try to answer them for you. Okay, thanks. Goodbye, Ava.
Thanks a lot. Bye, Gwen.